and are also locations of both facilities as well as other types of environmental hazards from people's homes, from climate change, due to high heat. And so, I mean, I think that in a nutshell is environmental injustice in New York City. And so how do we change that? The first thing here is organize, organize, organize. This is a panel at the Bar Association, but I'm here to say that nothing will change with lawyers and legal action alone. Organizing is really the key to everything that we do in our work at New York Lawyers. I think Sarah's nodding her head. And I think, as you will likely hear today as well, lawsuits in and of themselves, lawsuits are slow. They may not help 100% affect the change that we want. So organizing and leadership by affected communities is really crucial. And so hopefully the folks here who are not the lawyers on the panel will talk more about that. And the other thing is that there are the legal tools available to address civil rights violations in the environmental context are very limited. Environmental laws are specific to various types of environmental hazards. There's the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. They deal with permitting, but they don't incorporate civil rights mechanisms. And the main civil rights mechanism in the environmental context is Title VI, which, as many of you know, does not provide a private right of action for disparate impacts, for non-intentional discrimination. It may be in the coming years that there will be some evidence of intentional discrimination. However, it's very rare. It's difficult to prove intentional discrimination, especially in the environmental context when we're talking about siting of facilities. And so communities that are seeking to directly challenge discrimination and disparate impacts of siting of facilities or other types of environmental harms in their communities have a really hard time. You can't go to court directly. You have to file an administrative complaint with EPA. And EPA has been notoriously terrible at not just resolving these complaints, but addressing them in the first place. There was just a lawsuit that was decided, I'm trying to remember the venue, but that essentially found that EPA was violating the law by failing to timely investigate and resolve Title VI complaints in a variety of communities. There were communities that sued that their complaints had been filed and not investigated for 10 plus years. So for many communities, filing a Title VI complaint, maybe you'll do it, but it's not the most effective way to address environmental justice issues. So I think what I've listed here are other avenues that communities have sought to follow. Legislative change, particularly on the local level or the state level, to take a look at some of the larger systems that contribute to inequitable siting, inequitable distribution of environmental harms in the city. Lawsuits, yes, and I think you'll hear today about some of the more creative uses of the law, not just using environmental laws, but using other types of law, disabilities law, nuisance laws, to get at some of these issues, and again, in coordination with organizing from affected communities. Public participation and administrative advocacy are also crucial. And another field that's emerging is, what you'll hear about more today, is legal resources to help communities transition to renewable energy, to use some of the tools that exist today to spur economic development, ownership of renewable energy infrastructure in their community. And this is exciting because it's a bit more positive and forward-looking rather than just fighting yet another facility in their backyards. Communities are starting to say, okay, well, what can we build in our backyards that will sort of move us forward and generate electricity and not harm the environment. So I want to turn it over to all the panelists to really talk about the details, because hearing about it in general is boring. And so you'll hear about some of these efforts from everyone else. Do you have something? Can I do like a full screen thing? Full screen? Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Patty Lopez and I'm part of Clean Up North Brooklyn, and thank you again for everyone being here. And as I said, I'm part of Clean Up North Brooklyn. We are a grassroots community organization that seeks waste, equity, justice, and we are families, people that work in the area, business owners, artists, just anyone is welcome to join who thinks waste equity is important and lives in Clean Up North Brooklyn. And so Clean Up North Brooklyn started because we live around a waste transfer station that it's pretty bad. So it all started in 2015 when one of our founders saw that there was a protest outside the waste transfer station because one of the workers of the station had complained about how they were being treated, and so this person got fired. So the Teamsters and other organizations were there to support him, and there was like a little protest. And so the founder, whose name is Jen, she approached them and she was like, hey, what's going on? And she learned that these people are not only terrible employers, but also pretty bad neighbors. And so we started Clean Up North Brooklyn because this transfer station, it's really bad for the environment and for the people's health, and just in general, it's not very good. There were a lot of trucks idling at some point. They like spray weird chemicals in the air that try to cover the smell of the trash. It also smells really bad in the summer. Is so bad. A lot of violations in general, like leaving the doors open, intimidating people parking in the area. And so on the fall of 2015, we had our first forum where we brought the community together. There were around 100 people, and people were just telling their stories about how this has affected their lifestyle. You know, there are kids with asthma. There's a lot of noise too. I personally have to sleep with earplugs because it's so loud sometimes. Mothers are afraid that their children are gonna get hit because of the trucks, that they don't stop at the stop sign. Sometimes they drive super fast. It's reckless driving. And so people came together and supported us. And so we started organizing the community. Families that have been there for over 40 years joined us. People that have been there a long time, business owners that have been there a long time. We all came together and we found a common ground, because I think a lot of us thought like, oh, this is a big waste transfer station. There's nothing we can do about it. And then after this forum, it was like, oh, you're also annoyed by this? Oh, and you're also annoyed by this? And it was like, oh, it's a bunch of us that we're annoyed by this situation. And so later on, we had our second forum on the fall of 2016, and then, okay, sorry, I forgot to say, so in this picture you can see that's in green is the waste transfer station, and in blue it's all residents. So there's a lot of people living around this waste transfer station, and a lot of these people happen to be Hispanic or Black or low-income residents. And so this is something related to what Rachel was saying, that it was like, how come these waste transfer stations always end up in places where people tend to be people of color or low-income people. And so this is a picture from the first protest that the Teamsters organized for that guy that got fired. And sorry, I just forgot to click the button here. And this is from the first forum. We had the meeting in one of our neighbors' studio. And this is from the second forum, where we had the support of other organizations like Align, the Teamsters, El Puente, and a bunch of other great people that also support our cause. And so after that little gathering of also 100 people, where the councilman was present, we had a little demonstration outside the waste transfer station, and I think the workers were like, what is going on? But it was pretty empowering for the community to just come together and say like, hey, this is not right. And it's also empowering because it gives people a voice, and sometimes people think that they don't have a voice or a right to do so because maybe they don't speak English, or because maybe they feel that they are not educated. And so this has been empowering for all of us in one way or another. And so after our second forum, which was in the fall, we met up with the owners of the station in the winter, and we sat down with them and we tried to have a conversation where we said like, hey, this is really bothering us, you guys changed some things, blah, blah, and they were like, yeah, totally, we're gonna fix everything, and nothing happened. So that's when Neil P. Said like, hey, we could do a lawsuit. And so we had a...
That's exactly how it happened.
Yeah, hey, we should have a lawsuit. And so we gathered the community, we started reaching out to people saying like, hey, who wants to be a plaintiff? And actually around 10 people signed up, people from different backgrounds. So it was not only residents, but also business owners and people that work in the area. So that was really great, because despite all the cultural and socioeconomical differences among us, we found something that we are all fighting for. So that was pretty nice, getting to know your neighbors and just power in numbers. So in the summer of last year, we presented the lawsuit in an event in a park, and there was coverage from a lot of media outlets like Gothamist, New York Times. I can't remember. There are some that I can't remember right now. But yeah, so here the ladies at NYCHA, they were very helpful to push the lawsuit. And it has just been a great experience being a part of Clean Up North Brooklyn, because, as I said, sometimes you think you don't have power, but then you realize that if you come in a big group, people will unite and you'll do something about it. And yeah, we're very grateful for Neil P. And we are very happy because now we're not only fighting these waste transfer station, but we are being able to help other neighbors with issues that they have with other things like noise complaints or party complaints. So it has been a great experience. And that's it.
That's not it, but...
Well, yeah, of course not.
It's not it. So much more. I'll just scooch closer to you, Patty, to get closer to the microphone. So I hope Patty's energy just gives you a little bit of the taste and flavor of what has been going on in this community in Bushwick, East Williamsburg. Again, just to take a step back really quickly, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest Environmental Justice Program sort of was almost founded because of waste issues and waste inequities in the city of New York. And we've always been embroiled and battling the inequalities of how waste is collected and processed in New York City as one of the greatest environmental justice challenges our city faces. And as Rachel mentioned, and as Patty alluded to and illustrates every day, the way we tackle this challenge is not just one-headed or with one solution. We work with the impacted communities in organizing and supporting their organizing. We present legal tools and advocacy, such as meetings with the administrative agencies responsible, advocating when applicable with the Attorney General's office to ask for enforcement and assistance there, and with relevant city agencies. But also, when it's necessary, we do present the options of possible litigation where it makes sense, and where a community has the organizing to support the litigation, and the litigation can support the organizing. And I think Clean Up North Brooklyn really illustrates that perfectly. As the introduction mentioned, Clean Up North Brooklyn published a report, Profits Before Safety. I think it was in conjunction with your second forum, in which it's really remarkable, and if you guys haven't seen it, it's worth going home tonight and looking it up on the internet. This community, by themselves, mobilized to document 1 week of the transfer station's operations and identified over 1,000 violations of their permit conditions or local state laws, and put together this phenomenal report by themselves, just organizing independently, motivated by their frustrations and inability to be taken seriously by this facility. They ended up coming to NYCHA for assistance in sort of finalizing and vetting and publishing the report, and that's how our relationship really began. And it was through that we began our advocacy work with CNB as well. The meeting that Patty referred to occurred at the behest of the Department of Sanitation Commissioner. Commissioner Catherine Garcia asked to facilitate a meeting between the facility owners and the members of the community after she and her staff saw this report. And I'm not sure how regular it is, but I think it's pretty phenomenal that a community's organizing gets them invited to the commissioner of the city agency's office to facilitate a meeting between the community members and the facility. Also, the Department of Sanitation had a contract with the facility and was sending a lot of waste there every day. About 50% of the waste that the facility processed was through a contract with the Department of Sanitation of New York. One of the results of both the filing of the lawsuit, but also one of the long-term goals that NYCHA has been involved with to bring more equity to the waste processing system, which is the opening of the marine transfer stations in more equitably sited locations around the city, is that not even 3 weeks after this lawsuit was ultimately filed, the Department of Sanitation stopped sending waste to this facility. And so it was a win, and for a few months, the community felt a great relief. Of course, this being a privately owned transfer station, and by the way, it's owned by a private equity firm, which is a whole other issue. So this being privately owned, obviously bottom line is all that matters, and so what business was lost with the DSNY contract had to be compensated with commercial waste, and that sort of is tenfold worse because commercial waste is processed at night, whereas at least with DSNY, their trucks were coming during the day. DSNY trucks burn at least somewhat natural gas, and private waste trucks are all diesel, all way in violation of EPA emission standards. So sort of giving like the setting that Clean Up North Brooklyn got called into the commissioner's office, and it was at that meeting that the facility made these promises, which Clean Up North Brooklyn memorialized in a letter. And it was only after the letter setting forth the commitments made went unanswered and the commitments went unkept, that we presented the community with the option of legal recourse. And at NYCHA, we sat through and we said, what can we do? What are the best legal tools here? I mean, we looked into a potential Clean Water Act case. Interestingly, the owners of this facility were being sued for Clean Water Act violations by Riverkeeper for another one of their facilities. It wasn't the right fit for this for a variety of reasons, not only, but especially because of the notice provisions and the citing. So we really settled upon this as being a classic nuisance case. And nuisance being sometimes an environmental lawyer's best friend and easiest friend, with the exception, of course, that you're in state court. So that's sort of how, you know, from the legal perspective and the community lawyering side, we came to file this lawsuit on behalf of Clean Up North Brooklyn. We wouldn't be anywhere without the amazing organizing and efforts that went on, and community-driven efforts, and continue to go on as this lawsuit proceeds, which is a pretty slow process. To just give a very quick update in the lawsuit, and then I'll zoom out for a bit before turning it over. The defendants in the lawsuit removed our nuisance case to federal court pretty quickly as a very transparent delay tactic. And while as attorneys we would much rather be in federal court, their claim was that RCRA preempted our ability to file this nuisance suit in state court. And so for us to have conceded that would have sort of taken away the strength of our entire case and the nature of our entire case. We ended up having to argue and fully brief these issues, and we asked for fees. We asked for costs and fees, and the court to sanction the defendants because they kept changing the basis of federal jurisdiction. And just this past Friday, we finally got the order from the EDNY opinion and order, very strongly worded, remanding us back to state court and granting us fees and very harshly characterizing the defendants' actions. So we're feeling pretty good, and hopefully this also is good leverage in bringing the defendants to the table to finally listen to the community and start talking about settlement. Like I said, zooming back out to NYCHA's waste work, this is one of, I think, a very few pieces of litigation that we've done in waste work. Much of our work is policy-oriented, legislative and administrative. Right now, we are advocating fiercely in the City Council for the third version, meaning this is the third council that this bill has had to be reintroduced in, of what's known as the Waste Equity Bill. Last term, it was Intro 495. This term, it's Intro 157. Essentially, the most overburdened neighborhoods that have the highest concentration of land-based transfer stations, as you saw in the map Rachel put on, are the South Bronx, North Brooklyn, and Southeast Queens. And the solid waste management plan that the city passed in 2006 to try and redistribute where waste goes in the city, taking equity into account, contemplated some sort of legislation that would reduce the amount of waste that these overburdened communities could process, so would put limits on the permits that these facilities could get in these communities. That was in 2006. Like I said, we're in our third city council. Legislation hasn't yet been successfully passed. The bill we have has been watered down and negotiated for a lot of political reasons. We're likely gonna have a hearing on it at the end of this month. The bill that will be heard is, again, a very different bill than that which was originally contemplated, and the sort of bill that would really protect and move waste in a more equitable fashion from these communities. But it is a protective bill, and it will cap the amount of waste going to at least North Brooklyn and hopefully also the South Bronx and Queens. One other big policy campaign that NYCHA has been really involved in is to change the way commercial waste is collected and processed in the city. And we're part of a coalition of labor, environmental, and environmental justice groups that, including NRDC, called the Transform Don't Trash Coalition. that has been advocating for waste zones or franchises to be drawn into the city and only 1 or 2 haulers be allowed to operate in each zone, and that the hauler has to meet certain very basic standards like paying your workers enough, driving clean burning fuels, having certain safety equipment and following certain safety protocols, of course, recycling and diverting organics to meet our city's zero waste goals. So it's a big campaign that we've been a part of for 4 or 5 years. And 2 years ago, the city announced that they are going to be moving towards the zoning process. So it's a huge win, but there's still lots of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. So we continue to be really engaged and involved in that process as the city moves towards commercial waste zones. That's basically like a big picture of how we do, we advance this one specific area of environmental justice, which is the waste work, supporting community organizing, litigation, policy campaigns and legislation, as well as administrative advocacy. And Shiva, my colleague, is going to pick up on that and talk a lot more about that. But to the extent that anybody has more interest in getting engaged or involved in any of these waste equity campaigns, I can talk for hours about it. So I'd be happy to talk more.